Ask Mindful M Summer Spoken Word Series, Episode 10 What We Understand Later. Exploring Those Winter Sundays by Robert Hayden through the lens of marriage and family therapy. Welcome back to Ask Mindful M. I'm Mary O, Associate Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist, and we are continuing the Summer Spoken Word Series where poetry becomes a doorway into conversations about ourselves, our relationships, our families, and the systems that we shape and that shape us. Last week, we talked about what we carry, the beliefs, the patterns, the strengths, the wounds, and the stories that move through generations. We asked, what did we inherit that we want to honor? And what do we inherit that we want to transform? But sometimes as we grow, we begin to look back at those stories differently. Sometimes we understand something later that we simply could not understand then. Today's featured poet is Robert Hayden. In his poem, Those Winter Sundays, invites us into that kind of reflection. It invites us to consider sacrifice, love, regret, and what happens when time gives us a perspective we didn't have before. So today, we're talking about what we understand later. Sundays, too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blueback cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday weather made, banked fires blaze, no one ever thanked him. I'd wake up and hear the cold splintering, breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would rise and dress, fearing the chronic angers of that house. Speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well, what did I know? What did I know of love's austere and lonely offices? There's something deeply human about looking back on a relationship and realizing that you understood it differently now. Maybe when you were younger, all you could see was what you needed and what you didn't receive. But with time, you begin to notice the things you couldn't see before. The sacrifices, the limitations, the history. The way someone may have tried to love you with the only tools they knew how to use. And that realization can be complicated because understanding someone differently doesn't automatically erase what happened. You may recognize that someone did their best and still acknowledge that their best hurt you. You may understand where a person came from, but still grieve what you needed but never received. Both can be true. This is where I think marriage and family therapy offers such a meaningful lens. When we look at relationships, we are often invited to look beneath the behavior, not to excuse it, but to understand the context. We might ask, what shaped this person? What did they experience in their own family? What were they taught about love, about emotions, about conflict, about parenting? What did they have access to, and what did they not? A parent can love their child, but still cause pain. Someone can be responsible for harm and still have a story of their own. A person can have done what they believe was their best, and their best can still have fallen short. And here's the MFTT. Understanding the context does not erase the impact. Let me say that again. Understanding context does not erase impact. You don't have to choose between compassion for someone's story and honesty about your own. So then consider this: the stories behind the story. Sometimes when we begin looking at our families through an adult lenses, we see things we couldn't see as children. Maybe you realize your parent was carrying stress you never knew about. Maybe you recognize that your grandmother's silence was connected to the world she had to survive. Maybe you begin to understand why affection was difficult for someone in your family. Maybe you discover that a person who struggled to express love had never experienced healthy love themselves. And again, understanding isn't the same as excusing. And sometimes understanding helps us stop carrying questions that have no answer. Sometimes it gives us language for what once felt confusing. And sometimes it helps us recognize what happened to me was personal, but it may not have been about me. That realization alone can change the way we carry a wound. Next, consider forgiveness without the myths. So let's talk about forgiveness, because forgiveness can be one of those words that sounds beautiful until someone tells you that you're supposed to offer it before you're ready. So let me be clear. Forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is not pretending harm didn't happen. Forgiveness is not excusing someone's behavior. Forgiveness is not automatically reconciliation. Forgiveness does not require you to restore someone's access to you. You can forgive and maintain a boundary. You can release the resentment and still say no. You can understand someone's history and still decide that their behavior cannot continue in your life in the present. You can wish someone healing without volunteering to be the place where they continue to hurt you or find that healing. That's important, because forgiveness should never require us to abandon ourselves. So here's today's clinical pearl. Understanding can create compassion. Compassion can support forgiveness. But forgiveness doesn't require us to abandon ourselves. If anything else, it helps us find more of our depth and layers, because forgiveness is a process. You issue forgiveness and then you walk through it. You have to continually practice it, because that hurt is still there. The memories are still there, right? Because you don't forget. However, the choice that we make to continue to forgive, and eventually we won't think about it so much, right? And eventually, as we continue to let it go and let it go and let it go, in that sense, we're lighter, we're freer. We free ourselves up to be able to just understand our full capacity without all of that stuff in the way. Sometimes the work of forgiveness isn't about changing another person. Sometimes it's about changing the amount of space that hurt occupies within us. Not denying it, not minimizing it, but deciding that it will no longer have unrestricted power over our present. So I want you to take a moment and think about someone or relationship that you understood differently today than you once did. Maybe time has changed your perspective. Maybe becoming an adult has helped you see your parents as human beings. Maybe learning more about someone's history gave you context you didn't have before. Maybe your own experiences helped you recognize something you once couldn't understand. Now ask yourself, has understanding changed the way I carry hurt, even if it hasn't changed what happened? And then there's another question. Not what should you forgive, not what does someone else expect you to release, But what are you ready to release? Maybe it's resentment. Maybe it's an expectation. Maybe it's the hope that someone will someday become the person you needed them to be. Maybe it's self-blame. Maybe it's the belief that what happened to you gets to define what happens next. Whatever forgiveness looks like for you, let's be honest. Let it be intentional and let it include you. Perhaps there are things we can only understand later. Perhaps perspective comes with time, with distance, with healing, with maturity, and sometimes with the courage to look at a story again. Not to rewrite what happened, but to understand what it means to us now. Maybe forgiveness isn't always a gift we want to hand to somebody. Sometimes it's the space we create within ourselves, so the past no longer gets to occupy every room. And when we begin to release what we've been carrying, we make room. Room for peace, room for connection, room for love, room for courage, room for becoming. So I'll leave you with this question. What are you ready to understand differently? And what are you ready to release? Thank you for spending these mindful moments with me. And as you move through this week, remember, understanding is not the same as excusing. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting. And healing does not require you to abandon yourself. It actually is an invitation to rediscover all the rooms you have inside of you once you take that step to clear everything out. Until next time, stay mindful. I'm Mary O, Associate Licensed Marriage and Family Therapist, and take care.